Thursday afternoon for this month's Kakala Dialogue. My name is Dylan Kava. My pronouns are he, him. And I will be your moderator for this afternoon. Just a bit about Ha'apai in the beautiful kingdom of Tonga with maternal links to Kuluku and Ronga. I'm a climate communicator and currently work as the Data Communications Officer for the President's Climate Action Network, or PCAN. We work around climate policy coordination in the Pacific region. As we kickstart of, Kala, the Indigenous Kala, just ground out discussion. So Kala reflects commitment to use Indigenous language, worldviews, and to identify how best to weave old and new ways of thinking and working in the Pacific. Adopted from famed Pacific academic Professor Konai Helu Thaman, the original Kakala framework is a Pacific-centered research framework that integrates a Pacific values and philosophies. This Kakala dialogue is built on Pacific desires to reconceptualize, to re-educate, to rethink, and reclaim spaces within our Indigenous worldviews. Panel discussions will be focused on thinking that in the spirit of decolonizing INGOs in the Pacific. So this afternoon, we'll be talking about Indigenous and queer, the role of the development sector in protecting the pride through Indigenous knowledge and practices. Here about a step back and provide a brief overview. There's the increasing hostile environment surrounding LGBTQIA+ rights, and it's concerning. It's a concerning global trend that's both global North and global South countries. In recent years, there's been a rise in transphobic, homophobic rhetoric, which has further exacerbated the challenges faced by LGBTQI. In many parts of the world, discriminatory laws and policies persist, creating legal barriers for LGBTQ, such as adoption, marriage equality, and protection from discrimination. This is particularly moreover, the rise of transphobic and homophobic rhetoric is evident in public discourse, arenas, misinformation, and stereotypes. Our communities contribute to an atmosphere of hostility. This not only hinders equality, but also mental health risks for people in our community. Cultural norms and traditional values may be less accepting of people of diverse socies. LGBTQI+ people face even greater challenges. They often confront higher levels of violence and limited access to supportive resources and communities. So it is in this context, INGOs in the development sector are confronted with the need to reconceptualize and re-envision their approach to advocating for the rights of people of diverse socies. And so to discuss this further, we have two amazing panelists joining us this and Vika Kalokalo joining us. But before I introduce these amazing people, just a bit of a language disclaimer. In this talanoa, when we refer to women and girls, we refer to them in all their diverse identities, including as lesbians, bisexuals, trans people, intersex people, fa'afafine, laity, and other non-heteronormative Pacific identities. Francophone women, diaspora women, Indigenous women, women living in occupied and colonized territories, migrant women and girls, women with disabilities, including sexual and intellectual disabilities, sex workers, women living in rural and remote places, young women, the girl child, single mothers, women with albinism, women in sports and women in creative industry. Refer to gender non-binary people. When we refer to gender non-binary people, we include Pacifica identities that challenge gender norms and identities in Samoa and Vakasalewalawa in Fiji. We acknowledge that these identities are broad, that they have existed for centuries, and that prior to contact and colonization were respected and celebrated by Indigenous people in the Pacific. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Lady Rhonda. Rhonda is an Indigenous queer activist, Itauke Vakaselewaleo, co-foundress and executive director of the Trans Affirmative Action Guild. TAG is led and founded by Fijian trans diverse folks of proud Vakasa origins. As proud beings of multiple intersections, we navigate life, humanity, nurturing ecosystems, and protecting indigeneity and cultural diversity. Welcome, Rhonda. Our second panelist is Vika Kalokalo. Vika, or Kado, is an Itauke trans-masculine young feminist and women's human rights defender since 2017. Vika is a management collective member of Diverse Voices in Action, or DIVA, for Equality Fiji. She's now representing DIVA as a member of the Climate Change and SRHR Coalition and Pacific Coalition, the focal point for the DIVA Women Defend the Commons Network and the DIVA Women's Builders Support Group. Her work as a feminist women builder includes being one of the key members of a team from DIVA that worked in a maritime village to build a walking bridge for a community that since Cyclone Winston in 2016 were only able to access the village school through a log bridge. Vika has a diploma graduate in electronics engineering and an APTC Certificate 2 graduate in construction. She is an example of a South STEM graduate and activist who is continuing to learn, innovate, and develop knowledge, skills, and expertise to build more locally appropriate technology and to connect with women and LGBTQI+ people in urban, informal, rural, and maritime areas in old and new ways. Welcome, Kado. So that was a mouthful for me. So I'm now gonna, move the conversation to where it really should be with our panelists. And we're gonna kick off with our first question. And maybe I'll direct it to Rhonda first, and then we'll hear from Kado. Rhonda, what has been your experience in campaigning for greater inclusion for people of diverse SOGIESC or LGBTQIA+ people?
Thank you, Dylan. Just checking if I'm audible and everything's okay.
You're good to go.
So well, my experience with advocacy and, of course, activism in the movement, I've been around in the movement for more than 15 years, close to 20 years. And the narrative has shifted, but very slowly. So the experience has been how alien the language is to our Indigenous community. The language is fairly new. So there seems to be a lot of effort that's been injected towards ensuring that the language is much more understood. And then there has also been conversations around how our own identities don't actually fit into the Western demographic of what sexual diversity or gender diversity is at the moment. So it's been difficult within our own community as LGBTI or diverse or just people. And it's much more harder when it comes to those outside of our community. So there's been a lot of work that's been done by organizations such as DIVA that Kado represents, the River Pride Foundation in trying to translate and create material to make it readily available for not only those of us who do work in the urban areas, but to make sure that it's understandable, it doesn't go over people's heads in the rural areas as well. So it's, in a nutshell, it's been hard trying to link the existing language, LGBTQIA, Sojiesk, to our own Indigenous vernacular has been tougher because the language does not exist in our vernacular. And to try and relate, especially Western identities with Indigenous identities, is part of that challenge. Hence why there's been some pushback from communities. So I'm not going to go too much because I know there's more questions coming, but thank you, Dina. And that's how it's been for us so far.
Thank you, Rhonda. And I think that is part of that decolonization process, is what words can we relate to in our own culture that actually goes beyond the Western terms that have been put on us or that we've been pigeonholed with. And it's quite a difficult one.
And I love what you said there, the challenge of our language, our vernacular existing in a global community. It's been unfortunate. We'll see essences of it in every space we occupy, that we have to resort to being broad brushed by a Western term and concept in order to exist in those spaces. You will hardly hear terminologies that relate to Indigenous people in global communities. It's much more harder for communities like us from the Pacific who are spread across the ocean. It's hard to get our language to live, basically. So I'll say an example. When I go abroad and I say Bakasa Leola, I was like, oh, okay, where does that fit in? Does that term fit in, or am I allowed to exist on my own? So yeah, that'll just unpack quite more in the conversation. Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, Rhonda. And maybe to you, Kado, I'd like to hear some of, I guess, your experience in campaigning for diverse Sojiesk inclusion in discourse here through DIVA, but also through your many other affiliations as well.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Rhonda. And hello, everyone. So basically, here in Fiji, it is not very easy. It's difficult. It's challenging, very challenging when you campaigning and try to be inclusive of the LGBTQA+ in the community, because you're up against a system that is embodied in us from a very early age. When we were born as Itoke, as an Indigenous, you were born into a clan. You were already born into a Husa or status. You already have an identity, and then comes your status, and then you go to school, and then you have another identity, and then you go to work, you have another identity. So it's very challenging because the system here in Fiji, it is built up on the foundation of religion, the foundation of culture. So you're fighting a system that is in place for a very long time. Plus, it's been colonized. So actually, the patriarchal system is already there. So for being for here in Diva and being in the front line for LGBTQ people, you not only you content, trying to get the peeps to be put as well, you're also putting your life at risk by being in the front line, you're exposing who you are. And already we had this identity as it okay, we wear our hats in all the places that we go to. But as soon as we have that identity, the LGBTIQ that comes with it, we know here in Fiji that The moment you brought up LGBTIQ, it is a no-no to bring it up in a space where we know each other, where we're related to each other somehow. So it's not easy. It's being most of the work is being done by so many organizations that has come very far, and those that exist today pave the way. That's why we're sitting here today and openly talking about it and try and to relate it into the Itauke context. So I could say that, you know, we sometimes in campaigning we don't use our LGBTQ head. We use the Itauke, the traditional head that we so to penetrate or to break down the wall that is in front of you. You use sometimes we use our religion in connecting because you work best because, okay, we have the same faith or we are related. I'm related to that village, or I have connection to that village. So we can go there and, you know, for us in the, we always find our entry points, whatever the community or the women, whatever they're already working on, like climate change, biodiversity protection. So we come in there and using that focus and try and brought in Sodisec, violence to accommodate and also include the discussion around LGBT community. Because we know in every community there exists the LGBTQ community members and they don't want to identify themselves. So we also apply with do no harm. So we don't want to out them. So it's either through the climate change work, it's through the violence work, it's through the young women's work. It's not only direct as because there will already be war sitting down in front of us trying to do because of the context, the system that is placed, is grounding the entire state of religion and culture, and also and to be aware of the harm that is bringing to that community if we outed them. That it is, oh, we come in and campaigning for the LGBTQ, and that's how we out the community, out the people, the gender non-binary people, the lesbian, and everyone that is under the LGBTQI umbrella. So in terms of campaigning, so that's another way, another approach that we use in trying to get everyone included in the work that we do, not just the LGBTIQ, promoting the inclusive and campaigning, but everyone and all people abroad. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you, Kado. And I think you touched on something really interesting. Huh? You know, we always talk about how a lot of these issues are very large issues and very complex issues, and how, you know, an intersectional approach is needed to address some of these issues. But, you know, the point that you were making about using that intersectionality to continue to engage with the community without outing them, without, you know, but instead of just saying, oh, you can't come out, so we can't work with you, you're using that lens of intersectionality to continue to engage with these community members, our community members. I think that's such a good lesson. I think from, I guess, if anything, that's the one thing that I got from you that really blew my mind, because I think we do this work quite often. And I guess if you look in the climate movement as well, which is what I'm familiar with, a lot of the people driving that work are also people of diverse SOGS. And it is this, you know, one thing that we have in common that keeps us in community with each other is this work on activism, this activist work. But a really important insight there. And, you know, you also brought in intersectionality through different lenses as well. You know, you have our history, a system that's fully entrenched. You also, which is interesting one, because if you think about culture and religion, you know, culturally we have the Vaka Salewalawa in our culture. Then how does that reconcile with people's attitudes towards it now? What changed then? It's an interesting conversation to be had. But anyways, we'll go into our second question. Is there a challenge in introducing and socializing terms like SOGIESC and LGBTQIA+? Should INGOs and development sector start exploring the use of other terms, recognizing that Pacific cultures have their own queer narratives and identities? Maybe I'll go to you, Rhonda, again, and feel free to chime in on anything that I said before as well.
I'm glad you brought up that conversation, because I harp on and on about it on social media, on how we have a system that was born out of glorification of coloniality. We glorified the colonizer. So there was a lot of aspects of our culture that was sacrificed because they were demonized by the colonizers that came in through missionaries, of course, and then of course the colonial system. The reason why we glorified our way of colonization was because we were seeded. So our way of colonization was by cessation and not by conquest, how it happened in India, etc. So we were seeded. Literally, we asked for the colonizers to breach our shores and save us. So that was the initial image of what we had in our heads when we approached the colonizers. They were our saviors. Now, over time, the unfortunate reality is we've forgotten that there were so many aspects of our culture that we had sacrificed. They were born from an experience of our environment, of our experiences through sociology, how we existed amongst each other. So they were important. These aspects of our culture were tailor-made to suit our people. And we sacrificed it to adopt a foreign concept that was made for a completely foreign environment, because people had relations with each other much more differently than ours. And here we are trying to absorb and adopt. And what happens? We are lost. We find ourselves losing out on information because most of this has never been contextualized to suit our people. And this is where the pushback comes. Even though we glorified modernity, coloniality, because it brought a lot of good things, because they said certain aspects of our culture was wrong, so we demonized and sacrificed it, we were chipping away at our indigeneity, at the authentic being that made who we were. And part of that sacrifice is the identity of Kakala. And of course, part of the chipping away happened because of how we related to each other. What was prime in Indigenous settings was relationship and kinship. They were kani, they rokorokovi, they bakaminimine. These were things to ensure that we were nurturing relationships. And so many things that were taboo was things that happened in the room. Hence why there was no language that existed for it. We did not have conversations about who we were sleeping with or who did we sleep with. This is why the identities that we have in Indigenous settings are not completely related to Western terminologies, because we don't talk about sex, but we do talk about duty. Because of the Matangali, these are different social groupings, family kinships. So we have the Tokotoka, and then the Matangali, and then the Yavusa, and then the Tikina. These were all born out of duty. So where we belonged in the Tokotoka and the Matangali and the Yavusa was all assigned according to the skills that we had, and it was all according to what strengths and contributions that could be born out of that. So if I was a Mbati, I was a warrior. I was part of a warrior clan. And if I was a Turanga, I was part of a Turanga clan. And these all interlinked because there were certain responsibilities that each of these tribes had to each other. And that was what was more important. What do we bring to the table to ensure the survival of the community and the protection of the sanctity of this community? We did not talk about things that happened in private because it was taboo. Taboo in the vernacular language, oh my gosh, I'm going on and on if I could be allowed, but taboo in the vernacular language is about protection of the serenity of something. Something was serene, it cannot be invaded by simply discussing it in the open. You would see taboo used in what happened in the bedroom. You would see taboo placed on the ocean when it came to a death of somebody of stature. You would see taboo in terms of the head of an Itoke person. And you would also see taboo, this is where the confusion about gender identity, gender expression comes in. Even women were taboo. So when we talk about women in its place and people of diverse genders in social spaces, and we talk about women's rights, I get irked every single time when I'm told that the Western lens says that us as Indigenous people don't necessarily recognize women's rights. That's because we lack the understanding of the language that exists in our communities. Women were taboo. They were not allowed to be blemished and participate in conversations that men were going to be talking about because they were talking about politics. Women were so precious, they were kept away from these spaces. Women were so precious. Men did so much simply to just transfer a woman from her place of birth and to bring her to his place, his home. There was a lot of sacrifice that had to happen because the worth of a woman. The word taboo means protecting how serene something is. So it's hard for us to unpack things about sex and sexual orientation because it talked about who we were sleeping with under the sheets in the bedroom. So that's part of the pushback. So as organizations and civil society movements, we have to try and see where we can bridge these gaps using our own language, contextualizing what's good for our people that doesn't necessarily continue to chip away at our indigeneity, because this is what foreign language means for us as well. We start losing the essence of our own because we've been told this language has no place in the global community. So we start using Western terminologies, we get conflated, and then so much gets lost. Right? And I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of diverse people of diverse subjects here in Fiji and in the Pacific, still cannot self-identify by using Western terminologies. More than 70%, I can say, don't even know whether they're non-binary, don't even know whether they should be identified as trans, don't even know if they should be gay men, because it's still very much foreign. So I guess if there has to be any sort of investment from donor foundations, from institutions of power that have influence and to shift perspectives, shift powers, it needs to be reintroducing and re-empowering Pacific languages and identities into the global forum, basically. If that could mean, instead of translating English to vernacular, maybe just include vernacular into the global language. If we can do that for Two Spirits, why can't we do it for Faksalelewa? If we can do that for non-binary, why can't we do it for Fa'afine, Fakaleti? These are words that are very precious to Vakasan communities, trans folks. So yes, that's my contribution. Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, Rhonda. Some really good nuggets around, particularly around language and how important the use of language is, as you know, as an inclusion, but also as an exclusionary tool, as we discuss people, well, Sojiask in general. I think it was really interesting that separation that you did between, you know, it wasn't out of sex, but it was out of duty. It wasn't out of gender, but it was out of duty. I think that's such a pearl of wisdom, you know, and I'm learning a lot, definitely, as a person of mixed background, so being both Tongan and Fijian, but a Kailoma Fijian. It's interesting to hear a lot of these terms, and particularly around tabu, you know, how you made that nuanced definition of what tabu really means. And the connotation of tambo in recent times has changed to mean something that's like toxic. But you really put things into perspective, how it's, you know, it's protecting, it's about protection. But yeah, thank you for that. I was wondering, Kado, you do a lot of work in community as well. And I was wondering, you know, are there some issues with socializing terms like SOGIESC and LGBTQIA+ within our communities? Is that an issue that Diva faces? And possibly, you know, what benefit would introducing our own language and our own narratives play in the work that you do?
Thanks, Dylan and Rhonda. Yes, through the Diva work, I could say it's very challenging, but we managed to get a message across to the audience, because whatever work that we are doing, we always have these free schools that we have at the office when we have communities requesting for knowledge and skill sharing session. So within that presentation, we always have a slide for SOGIESC and LGBT community. So like I said earlier, that you know, we embodied those systems that we you know, that we were attached to, and I think we still carry it forward. We still carry it forward. We still abide by it, because what we see, it's being generalized and practiced. We practice it too, so that we could be accepted. We should be accepted because for our safety, for our security, safety of our family members. That's why we follow the mainstream system. But it doesn't brought down to a person's intersectional needs as a human being, as myself, as Kado, not as a person who's a member of a Matangai, who's a member of a village, but as a personal, as a human being, as myself. What are my needs? So that's where SOGIESC comes in. SOGIESC is not about LGBTQ alone, LGBTQ community alone. It's about everybody. Like if I could break it down, like SOGIESC for SO, it's a sexual orientation. Each and everyone have our different orientation, or we are attracted to, maybe attracted to the same sex, maybe attracted to the opposite sex, or maybe attracted to both. So that applies to everyone. And regardless if you have financial status, you have good education background, you live in a rural or live in the urban. So your sexual orientation, it's about everybody. And then comes your gender identity, what you identify yourself inside. Sometimes it aligns with your sex characteristics. Sometimes does not align with your sex characteristics. So for myself, I could, I'm a cis woman, so I could, sometimes I identify as a trans male or tomboy. Sometimes, okay, a young woman from Suba or from Nandi. So that's your identity, and you have your expression, what you show yourself to the world. The morning that you wake up in the morning, what the dress that you decided to wear, the shirt you decided to wear, the makeup, your hair, what to do with your hair. That's something you are deciding for yourself. Of what, like we always say in Diva, personal is political. So whatever decision you make about your body is about expressing yourself into the world, what showing to the world. Sometimes, most of the times for us LGBT and transmasculine people, we when we want to wear shorts, you know, we get scolded, and also we pushed aside because, oh, you want to become a man, you want to be a boy, why are you wearing shorts? You're a girl. So those are some of the things that we face when we want to express ourselves as LGBT community. Regardless of, we have the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. That's one big, but the implementation onto the ground, to the community level, there's no implementation. So despite of having the Bill of Rights for social sex in a constitution, but there's no brought down. We still face discrimination. Our fellow colleagues and friends are being killed and violated. And of course, we have sex characteristics, where you have a vagina when you are a cis woman, or you have a penis when you are male. And also we have gender non-binary and intersex people who have both the male and the female sex organs and reproductive systems. But then even the society even tells us that you belong here and you belong here. But whoever they want to be and whoever you want to be is not everyone's business. It's about bodily autonomy, the decisions, your right to make the decisions about your own body, who you fell in love with, who you are attracted to. But that comes with, the challenges that comes with the social, the intelligence challenges, the social challenges, the family challenges. Like we have double rates of the violence against women and girls. For LGBTQ communities, we have 83% intimate partner violence. We also have 61.89 unemployed LGBT women because of their social sex. We have 48 LGBT women who refuse jobs because of their social sex. 81.47% Itauke LGBT women got kicked out from home because of social sex. So that's why it's very challenging and it's very difficult to speak about this openly in the community, unless they request Diva provide preschool session, and also, there's also a language barrier in trying to translate the whole SODISEC LGBTQ acronym into our own dialect, Itoke dialect, because there's no word for it. Like Rhonda said, there's only one word here that we know, Kakala, or there's a corridor name that we always use for lesbians, panikeke. So here in Diva, we take the word because we're lesbians, we take the word, we claim it, and we use it as a tournament, as a community games we always have every year. But thank you, COVID, it has come to a stop, but we still gonna have it maybe next year or some other years. But it is something that we take it and we own the name. So for us, like we are Pacific people, we already have our identity, our narrative. But to bring the LGBTQ narrative and the SODISEC all together, it will always be a challenge because of the context that we live in. Because there's no vernacular word, there's no specific word for being a lesbian or bisexual, transgender, queer, like that. But since Vaksalele was there before, it refers to male who portrays a trait as presence of female. So it always goes to the trans women. But the rest of us that are left out, we still have to find the identity and the name, even in vernacular, because we already have the Western identity for it. So, for everything, all this work, and, or we want to socialize, we want to include inclusivity, but to challenge the system, there's always, issues that arise. And also there's always something from the church, something from the culture, something from the society that always restricts us in moving the work. But we will need everyone on board and carrying the workload.
Makakado, some really important points there, and I really wanted to highlight, the different roles and almost different personas that, we have to embody in order to just exist and navigate all of these different spaces that we're in, and how the onus is always on us, unfortunately, to act differently or just to exist in these spaces. You talked a little bit about, you know, how you are as a person, but then when you go into community, there are slight, you know, albeit subliminal changes, like little changes that we make, unfortunately, in order to navigate these spaces. And, you know, we all understand it to be a spectrum. You know, it's not a zero-sum game. There's no pressure or need to be one thing or the other. It's just this socialized pressure that we have when it comes to Sogiesk. And you did mention something in passing, and I did want to highlight maybe two initiatives, that maybe one from Diva and one from TAG, but also RPF that's happening. You know, with Diva, you mentioned very briefly free school sessions. I wondered if you could maybe just elaborate a bit about what that is, and what that activity, you know, attempts to bridge, particularly as we're talking about reconceptualizing and re-envisioning how INGOs should interact with our community. I think what Free Schools is doing is amazing. And the other thing as well, with maybe RPF, Rhonda, is the engagement that's happening with religious leaders, and how that socializing is happening at that level, as a means of, you know, addressing some of the challenges that we face in progressing, I guess, LGBTQIA plus rights. So maybe I'll go to Rhonda first, and then I'll come to you, Kado.
Thank you, Dylan. Yes, I think all of us here are aware of the immense work that's been spearheaded by Rainbow Pride Foundation in its work with religious spaces, and of course its continued conversations with religious leaders, and of course from that, by extension, trying to then work with other religions, so to speak. But it's been immense, and I'm not the perfect person to allude to this, but I do know that the essence of how this work came about and how it started was all from a place of the need to collaborate, as opposed to what activists have been synonymously known for, confrontational approaches. So the need to collaborate with the very ancient pillars that uphold our society here in Fiji, which is religion, the vanua, and of course the matanitu, the three-legged stool that was spoken to in length in a book written by Ratsukuna, and that has been the guiding principle for most Itoke. So the need to work with religious institutions, because we realize that there is a very far reach and a very extensive reach that the church has and influence on its people. And we've been so blessed. I'm beginning to make reference to myself being here for RPF, but RPF has been so blessed to secure the advocacy and the activism of a person within the system, Padre, Reverend James Bhagwan, who's been able to continue the work even where we're not present, who's been able to occupy space on our behalf to continue these conversations. So, and I also know that most of us have heard of how it's come about in the just recent conference. I don't know whether it's ended or it's still going on, but I guess the conversation or addressing the elephant in the room had to be had, and it started. The only concern I do have from a trans perspective, and I'm sure from a general diverse suggest person's perspective, it'll be nice if these conversations are being, if we are being discussed at these spaces that are predominantly occupied by these patriarchal systems like the church. It would be good to have us in that space if you're going to be discussing this. The reason I say this is because we need to authentically represent us in these spaces. so that we don't continue to expose diverse people's bodies and emotions and spirits and souls to unrequited tearing apart. It's going to be happening at these very rigid masculine spaces, predominantly male spaces. Whenever we are discussed, we just encourage that these people in power who occupy these spaces to invite us so that we can represent ourselves authentically. So yes, that's what I have to see when it comes to the work that I know of River Pride Foundation. River Pride Foundation is also in the process of completing the development of a SOGS Itoke glossary that's going to be available for people, for general people in the community, and of course, more booklets to be available for people in politics. So that's what I'm aware of with the work that with RPF has been happening, and I know that Oxfam is in great support of most of these efforts. Yay to that. As for TAG, the Transformative Action Guild, the organization I represent here, we're committed to spotlighting the need for cultural custodianship and Indigenous protections as our way of social inclusion, as our way of efforts into social inclusion. We're trying to work towards identifying what already exists that can be used as leverage for trans-identifying persons. So we can, use that context to effectively include our people back into society as amazing individuals as they already are. But a lot of people don't see that yet. So that's the efforts that we're working into. So our first step, and of course, this is in partnership with Diva, who's been an amazing help to our establishment and the work that we do. We have an activity that's coming up that's committed to trans folks and their self-identification. So it's a spiritual and bodily development program and workshop that we're working on, and that will help people heal from the inside out. And of course, invest into their lives and basically listen to what they really want. As this work that we do in advocacy is a very lonely job because it's not so kind. So we'd want to find out what do the people on the ground actually want. And I'm sure some organizations already have information on this, but this is our efforts towards unpacking the trans need in terms of that specific work. But yes, thank you so much, Dylan.
Thanks, Rhonda. Maybe I'll just pass on to Kado very briefly, please, Micah.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Dylan and Rhonda. So I would just like to add on that for us, that's why we do work with the police, the prison, FNU. We do work on violence with the police and prison. FNU, we have been doing workshops with them on SOGISET because they deal with students every day who have diverse sexual orientations and identity. We have done workshops for the SUVA, FNU SUVA and FNU West, all the stuff FNU. So we have done, and only left for us. So this work is kind of, that's why we develop our own research. Launched in 2019. You can find this on our website. It contains the evidence-based and the real realities of LGBT women that they face. Discrimination from the church, beaten by the police, kicked out from home. So some of the work that we do here in Diva, we create our own analysis from the community, through the community, and by the community, because of we already have our challenges and obstacles already there existing in the community. But since we are trying to get a clear idea from the service providers of who we are, that's why we develop our research, so that when we go and speak about our issues and challenges, we have our evidence right there with us, so we can present it to them, to the police, to the church, on all the service providers, because of what we face when we visit them physically. So for us, kinds of the draw down the identity was this. Sometimes it's also quite challenging when we have communities who don't want to be identified as LGBTQ. It's just to be left alone and just to be who they want to be because of the how many identities they already have. And for them to have an identity they're not comfortable with, so it's a no-no. So we just leave them, and whatever the identity that they are comfortable with, then they will have it and they will be called with. So for us in Diva, we try and use the analysis, ABC analysis. We call it ABC analysis, the analysis by community. So it's about the lived realities, experiences from the community that we invest in workshops and also, like I said, the preschool. If there are, if there's a need for workshops or a meeting with the Diva staff and management, and you want to learn more on SOGISEC and how we do the work we do, you can send us an email, contact us so that we can arrange for a day or two to have even workshops or to have trainings and meetings here in our office so that we can share the information that we're sharing and also the information that we have. But you can also find it in our website of all the tools and resources that we use. Thank you, Dina.
Nakakado. And, our last question, and I'm aware that we're running a bit behind on time. And so maybe, the last question was, what can INGOs like Oxfam do to center the voices, agency, and the rights of women and girls and gender non-binary Pacific Islanders? And just to point out a few of the, I guess, the recurring themes through some of the answers, we talked about the importance of language. We talked about, the creation of spaces for knowledge exchange, in particular, the example that Rhonda gave with the religious leaders. We also talked about being present in the room when these spaces are convened, and not only presence, and with presence, as a consequence of presence, comes that element of authentic representation in these spaces. And, a lot of amazing work with I guess the Soji-esque Itake glossary that's coming out. And, hopefully that's something that INGOs can take and then employ and use within their organizations when dealing with Soji-esque issues and when engaging with organizations like ours. And then really briefly in the beginning as well, Rhonda, in passing, you touched on the data gap that exists and the need to fill that data gap. And so these are some of the recurring themes that, I feel that INGOs can step in, can absorb, can support. That's the most important thing, support, because, our organizations and our people have the capacity and the technical knowledge to be able to do some of this work ourselves. And, that's kind of the role that I see them coming into. But I wanted to get maybe your insights into these. So, data gap, language, space creation, being present and authentic representation, and the use of our glossary. And I was wondering if you wanted to add anything on top of that in terms of how INGOs can center our voices. And very briefly, please, before I open up the floor to questions. Maka.
Thank you, Dylan. To be brief, I think it would be remiss to not mention that INGOs have already been doing so much work and contributing to ensuring that these movements continue to thrive and do the work that we do. Although we do have reservations on reporting mechanisms, because we understand that their expectations can contribute. This is from a personal perspective and from a trans perspective, and contribute to our bodies being torn apart as trans diverse people who are exposed to a plethora of challenges just to simply exist, which is why I am quite friendly and safe in the feminism spaces, and and in terms of how feminist organizations and donors approach reporting that's friendly and contextualized to our communities. Other than that, we're grateful that you continue to invest into the movement. And I guess what's important that we can encourage international NGOs is to realize that sometimes the support provided and the thematic area of how these resources are provided don't necessarily match with the need on the ground. And I guess that's the gap we need to bridge, to make sure that international NGOs are investing into the actual need of the people on the ground. I look after an organization that's community-led, and most of our members are realizing how so much has been invested into advocacy at legislative level and at international level, which is important. But they keep getting left behind because most of the activities that are driven are solicited towards this kind of work, as opposed to the development of individuals on the ground to become productive people. These are people who don't have access to education, who don't have access to employment, who literally live off of blessings or the kindness of allies. But there seems to be no system in place to support them to become themselves in their true productive human beings and in the spaces that we have here. So INGOs can look into bridging this gap. So we start focusing on what's needed on the ground and the protection of these lives on the ground, and then work its way from the bottom to the top in legislative spaces. That's the suggestion I have. There's so much already invested into the upper echelons of the work that we do in civil society. Other than that, thank you so much. The Transformative Action Guild, of course, is open to more conversations on how these partnerships can look like, because at the end of the day, I know it's not so much about me, it's more about the people that I represent. And I'd be more than willing to share their stories to these powerhouses. Thank you, Dylan.
Thanks so much, Rhonda, for really beautifully summing up, what INGOs could be doing and have been doing to better support, I guess, social inclusion. Kado, your takes, anything you wanted to add about the role of INGOs?
All I can say is just practically, we do it practically here in Diva, build relationship with the communities over the years. And we have numerous workshops with them. We have pocket meetings. We have monthly check-in, country updates with the communities. And also we have the Women Defend the Commons, we have the Ganga Young Women's Network, and we have the LBT hubs. So most of them, when they want to organize quietly, a safe space, okay, that's okay. If they want to organize in an open environment, it's totally up to them how to they organize because of the safety and security of our community. So like I said before, we invested in the analysis, our ABC analysis by communities. I've shown our report and our booklet, SRSR booklet. This contains about the lived realities of the LGBTQ communities who have faced discrimination and violence. So what I'm trying to say is that getting the direct voices onto spaces and also investing in them. Some of us we can speak it out loudly, some of us we can't speak, we can write it. So in terms of them writing it, you can collect it in a booklet. So for us in Diva, we have our resources, our tools and resources of direct voices from the ground, and we work on what they need, and not on the challenges. We work on what they need, but on the challenges. That's where we build our analysis and turn it into a booklet. So our upcoming booklet is the Poverty to Power booklet. It's by our high poverty households that lives in our network. It's upcoming now and also being launched in October. It's also one of our tools and resources. So my takeaway is just that build the rest of the years with communities so that we can also get their voices and have a booklet so that we can take into spaces, take into the churches, take into the meetings and forums that we attend so that we can give it. We have the evidence base right here with us, when we're speaking about our issues. So it's a long road. It's not an easy work. We need everyone on board on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Kado. And you've highlighted a number of opportunities to engage and partner with, I guess, a number of these organizations, including DIVA, TAG, but also RPF, and a lot of work that's happening on the ground. At this point, I'd like to open up the floor to maybe one or two questions, if there are any from our participants. If you could just raise your hand or come off the mic. If you're uncomfortable with coming off the mic, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I guess we've had such a great conversation and have covered everything that we've left no questions in the minds of everybody.
Dylan, I just wanted to say something.
Sure.
We were talking about gaps. Another reason we're very thankful to international NGOs is they're filling in the gap that's supposed to be occupied by our own government in terms of resourcing these movements. I know I'm at the risk of sounding like a bee with an itch, but it is what it is. It's the reality that we have, which is why we civil society organizations are so dependent on these INGOs and donor institutions to breathe life into these dreams that we have as queer organizations, because of how difficult it already is to try and penetrate the government to try and have the support for us. They do provide support, but it could be more. And if there's anything else that the INGOs can do, is probably hold these institutions accountable, the government and ministries accountable to their responsibility towards diverse people of Sojiesque identities. So that's just something else that I want to put down the floor.
Thanks, Rhonda. Very pertinent point, I guess. We have a question from Rod. Rod, you have the floor.
Hey, thank you so much for that amazing conversation. I'm really honored to be able to listen to that. And I won't take up too much space, but I just wanted to mention that the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has just begun consulting for an LGBTIQA+ strategy for funds that might flow. And you've talked a lot about language and identity, and there's already a challenge there, I guess, for how DFAT in Australia might conceptualize even, and refer to what this strategy might look like. But I'm hoping that people know about it, and maybe they don't. So this is an information share, but also what would you say to the Australian government in consultation about how they should design a new theme within a development program? Big question. Sorry.
Big question indeed. Well, I think my response to that is there's so many amazing examples that already exist within our own region on how we can have this reporting or this framework or this guideline is supposed to look like, and how do we include our language in it? And I'd say check out New Zealand, check out Tahiti, check out New Caledonia, on how they've been able to incorporate the Maori, the Maohi language into how they do things, and how they managed to relate that. And I also see this work being done through a workshop conducted by the Secretariat of the Pacific Community with Dr. Francis Koya, who's the lead of that department in Culture and Arts. The incorporation of practices and seeing the value in these practices and cultural traditions, and of course the language. How do we ensure that the language seeps into mainstream mediums of operation, like a framework or a strategy? If we start doing that, and if I start seeing Fijian vernacular, Tongan vernacular, tailor-made for our different countries, you would see the absorption level much more higher from our community because it's in our language. The understanding is clearer. We can relate to it. There'll be very little pushback because it's something that's us. So incorporating something that's us into mainstream strategies is something that you can probably extract from New Zealand and New Caledonia and Tahiti, amongst many other successful parallels. So thank you, Rod. I hope that answered the question.
Kara, did you want to add anything? If not, I did want to...
No, thank you.
You're good. In terms of, I guess, as the strategy is designed to look at the funding modality that's employed and to look at some of the existing funds that are already in operation in the region. When I think of, easy is not the word. When I think of manageable reporting, I often think of organizations like the Pacific Island Feminist Alliance for Climate Justice. They have, a fund that supports them without being too, without the reporting mechanism being too arduous. And so these are the things, there are mechanisms that exist in the climate space. We're talking about Kato, which is this new funding modality that we're experimenting. So, it's not only about, decolonizing the language that we use, it's also decolonizing the systems that we use, the funding modalities that we use. And there's already a lot of work in the region being done to look at decolonizing the funding modality that ensures, as Rhonda says, that the needs of the communities are being prioritized over the needs of the donor. Vika, sorry, Kato, go ahead.
Dylan, I just want to add, for us in Cuba, we always been clear about funding, yeah? So we don't usually take funds that go against our politics. So for the government that is not supporting climate change or is against the work that we do on violence, so we are not taking any funds that's against our politics. We always take funds that, within our feminist framing approach, within our human rights basket, within our safe space, and also the work that we do on climate justice, on gender justice, on Fukushima, on LGBTQ rights and women's rights. So, like I said, we always be very clear and be very straight with whoever is giving the funds to the organization. If we know that there are other networks, other groups, other organizations that can have that funds, we'll be very clear. But we're not going to take it in segments of politics.
Thanks, Kado. Yeah, an important point about, I guess, internally as well, just knowing who you'd work with and who you wouldn't is also an important strategy. Rod, for your information, I've also just included the organization or the alliance that I had mentioned in the chat. I'm going to open up the floor to one more question, if there are any. If not, we'll round up our session this afternoon.
While that's happening, Dylan, I just wanted to add as well, I know when we want all the time in the world, but something else came in mind, and I guess it's how we're building partnerships and recognizing institutions that play crucial roles in the Pacific region. So if this is something that the INGOs want to look into, and because of reporting, you mentioned reporting, there are some organizations that work with the region already and support civil society organizations out there in the region could probably absorb the risks and the expectations from these donor organizations, while national member organizations continue to be provided with much more simpler methods of reporting. So I guess it's just doing all of our homework and finding out how these partnerships can be built. How do we work together for the sake of the people beyond the politics of organizations, coming together to ensure that there's healing, investment continuously, and of course, the feminist praxis. The feminist praxis has been so amazing. I'll give an example of a funding organization like, for example, the Urgent Action Fund. The reporting is a 1-question, 1-pager max. That's the reporting. They even accept, and I guess this is all about journeying together in this time and place that we occupy, using technology like recording videos to do reporting, audio. These are things that are much more easier because there's a huge skills gap. There's a huge skills gap in national run organizations. So we must realize that first if we want to get the best of them, if we're supporting them financially. So yeah.
Thanks, Rhonda. And I think we're going to round up there. I think it's been, a lot to process, a lot of great information, a lot of great learning, a lot of great opportunities. Just also highlighting that comment that I put in the chat about, this is maybe for Rod, that element of co-creation instead of just consultation, I think is super important. And with that, we've come to the end of our Kakala Dialogue. I'd like to thank the speakers for lending us their time and their expertise. Big vinaka vakalevu. Also want to thank everyone who joined us for this important discussion, even though it would have been okay if it was just the three of us. It still would have been such a fruitful discussion, but thank you for taking time out of your busy Thursday afternoon to join us. And maybe just a reminder that, this isn't a one-done thing. The Kakala series happens, well, it's a series, I just said. It's a series, it happens, I think, every month. And you can follow, you can keep up to date on the upcoming Kakala Dialogue sessions by following Oxfam in the Pacific on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. And yeah, for more information on upcoming sessions and speakers. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining. Until next time, Modemanda from Fiji. Thank you, Rhonda and